Hello, welcome back. Today we are going to have our last lecture on the Buddhist traditions. Um, Recall we've talked about the origins of the Buddhist tradition and talked about the birth of Buddha and talked about the Buddha, who's the first gem. And then we talked about the Dharma, or the teachings, which is the second gem. And there's three gems in the Buddhist tradition. And the third gem is the Sangha, or the community. And that's what we're going to talk about in this last lecture on the Buddhist traditions. All right, so let's get started. The Sangha, the third gem. Just a brief overview. We'll talk about the early community, or Sangha, which gathered at Deer Park after the Buddha reached enlightenment. We'll talk about classifications or hierarchy within the Sangha, or the community. We'll talk about male monks, or bhikshus, and female monks, bhikshunis. And we're going to end there for this particular conversation. I'll mention a couple things towards the end, such as stupas and pilgrimages, and maybe a couple other things to round out and conclude our time on the Buddhist tradition. All right, so the beginnings of the community are Sangha. After delivering that first sermon at Deer Park, after the Buddha attained enlightenment, we talked about that a few lectures back. The Buddha right away receives his students, or his disciples, at Sarnath, India. Right away, there's like rituals that are developed to initiate members into the monastic community. So you get ordination rituals that develop and take root early on when this community starts revolving around the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. Like other monastic traditions and other religious traditions, such as, for example, in the Christian tradition, likewise in the Buddhist tradition, the monks take vows. They take a triple refuge, or three vows. And the three vows are chastity, so to abstain from, say, physical pleasure or sexual intercourse, and poverty, and then obedience. New initiates put on the robes of the monk. So this is a thing you see likewise across religious traditions within monastic orders or communities. Often they distinguish themselves by the type of clothing they wear. And so it's a clear sign that they are kind of set apart, right, to be a part of these spiritual communities. So ordination rites, Buddhist ordination rites, there's steps in ordination that were introduced and that developed over time. One important aspect is the novice monk, the beginning monk, is assigned two different um, leaders, two different teachers. One's a demanding teacher who's very difficult, and the other is like a spiritual supportive guide. So it's kind of like you have the good, person and the bad person kind of balancing each other out. Full ordination rites usually take several hours. Friends and relatives are usually invited to come and honor the new monks. And during this moment, there's a space available, time and space made for the new monks to show gratitude to their teachers who have helped them and guided them along the way towards their ordination. So that's an important feature as well, showing gratitude to one's teachers, and again, having friend relatives there to celebrate with you. Within the monastic tradition, like other religious institutions and organizations, seniority is important within the monastic tradition. Therefore, the exact time and date of ordination is recorded because there's a seniority, right? The longer you've been a part of the community, the more you rise in terms of your seniority within it as well. So, because hierarchy matters within the Sangha, within the monastic community, there's great attention placed on categorizing the different levels within the monastic community. So there's four levels and eight categories within the monastic community. First, there's those who have entered the stream to nirvana, and that would be the top. Then there's those who are below, who have advanced enough to return just once more, but and that's the second level in the hierarchy. The third is those who are so advanced that they will never return. And the fourth is those who advance to realizing the arhat or worthy path. So you have these divisions, from the one being the lesser to the greater, and finally the fourth being the optimum, the best, is those who have became saints, basically. All right, so these are divisions. Now, hierarchies are part of monastic culture. Once a monk has reached the next level of those four levels, from entering the path to nirvana, the first level to the final level being becoming a saint or arhat. Once a monk has reached the next level in the spiritual path from one to the next, they are distinguished from those who have already matured at that level. So there's like levels within the levels. So therefore, you have 8 classifications. So you have the one who first enters this path in that stream towards enlightenment, and then if one gets further along in that path, they are on a different level than those who just entered. And likewise, once you get to that final level, there's arhats who just became arhats, and there's those who have progressed deeper within that level. So there you have 8 classifications. This emphasis on hierarchy, it emphasizes the importance of recognizing wisdom and age and experience, right, amongst other things. So here's some images. Here's an image of ordination rites being performed in a temple in Thailand. Here we have monks praying. So here we have a monastic community. Often monastic communities across different religious traditions, they spend a lot of time in prayer and a lot of time or meditation. And a lot of time their time in prayer and meditation, right? It contours their day. So again, another image, just kind of emphasizing, right, what occurs within monastic communities. So like other monastic traditions, often when these traditions are forming, different issues emerge, and often issues emerge around money, because there's this paradox, right? One of the vows of the triple refuges is poverty, but devotees often give money or give other gifts to the monastic communities. So while they have pledged poverty, they accumulate wealth. They accumulate wealth, and then you get this kind of tricky situation, right? How do you remain in a state of poverty when you've accumulated so much wealth? So this kind of creates controversies and discussions across monastic traditions. In the early Sangha, the community, it's important to note there was no central authority. Thus, disputes were settled by interpreting the Buddha's discourses from the Tripitaka, or the 3 baskets, which we talked about in an earlier lecture. Pardon me. So in the 4th century, here's a controversy. In the 4th century, before the Common Era, a certain bhikshu, a monk, was visiting the holy city of Vaishali and found bhikshus, monks, accepting donations of gold and silver. And so this monk criticized the other monks in public, which led to these monks feeling ashamed and thus demanding an apology from this monk who was criticizing them for accepting money. So because of this, there was a meeting convened. There was a council convened. And this council is called the Vaishali Council, which occurred in 383 before the Common Era. The conclusion reached at this council was monks were forbidden from accepting gold and silver. But at this council, we had this other question raised. One monk raised a question about the status of arhats, the saints within the Buddhist tradition, and asked questions such as, are arhats subject to the same limitations as ordinary monks or bhikshus? Are arhats susceptible to sexual misconduct? Are arhats to have doubts about doctrine? Or can one become arhat, a saint, by instruction without practice? So these type of questions, right? They're related. You often see these questions in religious communities, these questions around what are the qualifications for becoming, attaining a particular level, right, within the community. So you have questions around this kind of exalted status of the saint. You have questions related to it that emerge within the community, which leads to more questions such as, are only monks capable of attaining nirvana, or could lay Buddhists also attain nirvana? So the answer to that question, the earliest of the 3 vehicles or traditions, the Theravada tradition, teaches only monks, only those who have a certain special spiritual capacity can enter nirvana, where the Mahayana tradition, which comes after the Theravada tradition, emphasizes lay Buddhists likewise could attain nirvana. So you have different answers to that question that emerge across different traditions. Just in terms of community, I thought it'd be nice to take a moment and show some monasteries. This is one on the hilltop in India. It's magnificent. And again, in monastic communities, emphasis on spiritual practices, such as here, Zen Buddhism, which comes out of the Mahayana tradition, in a ceremony here at a temple in Japan. So in the early Buddhist tradition, in terms of women were seen as no less capable than men of becoming arhats or saints, and the way to nirvana was the same for both men and women. Shakyamuni once said, "Being be it a woman, be it a man, from whom such chariot doth wait, by that same car into nirvana's presence shall they come." And so you see this egalitarian, right? This kind of emphasis on equality between men and women in some of these teachings. Indeed, Buddhism never defined women as the property of men. However, early on, the Buddha resisted the formation of a formal monastic order for women because he believed that could be detrimental to the survival of his teachings, right? So there is like this, you see these teachings that point towards equality, but then there's the reality and the pragmatic decision of the Buddha not to form a female monastic community because within his context, it could lead to people pushing back against him in his teachings. But you have female monks currently, and they're known as bhikshunis. So here's some monks in a monastery with traditional pink. It's a very common color for female monastics, and a shawl of orange. In terms of female monks or bhikshunis, early sacred texts were often ambiguous. They were unclear towards the status of female monks. Some sacred texts do approve of the support that has been provided by wealthy women for the early community. The Pali Canon, one of the old sacred texts in the Buddhist tradition, it notably contains poems by female monks. So in practice, a difference was established between the male monks and the female monks who were forbidden from teaching their male counterparts. So again, you get these kind of this organizational hierarchy, right? And you have rules and structures within it. One being bhikshunis, female monks cannot teach bhikshus. And so these are patterns you see across religious traditions. You often see two patterns across religious traditions. And I wanted to take a moment to pause and briefly just mention this, right? So we're talking about the Buddhist tradition, but across religious traditions, and here you have some examples. There's often a divide between the religious professional and then the lay person, right? And so you have these hierarchies within these religious traditions. And often across the board, we generally near always see questions and issues around gender, hierarchy, and patriarchy. And so this is a common theme we see across traditions as well. It gets navigated differently in various traditions. Often like the teachings have the possibility for equality or egalitarianism, but then the tradition and the way it gets interpreted, often through male interpreters, slants in a way towards maintaining and creating hierarchy of difference, where males are given more privileges than females, generally speaking, within the religious traditions we'll be discussing throughout our time together. So lay Buddhists are Lay Buddhists participate in a variety of ways through rituals and exchanges that create karma between themselves and the monks. One such practice is the practice of giving, which is known as dana, which leads to the purifying of the layperson who has given to the monks. And you see this practice early on in the earliest tradition, the Theravada tradition. So here are just some images of this ritual. This is a way by which lay people who are not monks could create karma and participate in their spiritual advancement by giving and providing food for monks. Again, this practice known as dana. It's interesting to note that in the Mahayana Buddhism, the second tradition, which is the largest of the three traditions, rather than departing the world, lay Buddhists could attain enlightenment while living in the world. And they do that in a variety of ways. One way could be through taking pilgrimages to stupas, where you have relics that are kept within the stupa. And by taking these trips to these sacred sites, one builds karma. So again, stupas contain relics of the Buddha, bhikshus and bhikshunis, and lay Buddhists gain karmic merit through pilgrimage to the stupas. So I just wanted to show a couple images of stupas. So we're wrapping up our time here on the Buddhist traditions, of course. I just wanted to, briefly say a couple more things. So again, in terms of lay participation in the Sangha community, pilgrimages to stupas is one way to participate. Dana, almsgiving, practicing meditation, reading the scriptures. Here's a famous stupa in Nepal, one of the most famous, the largest stupa in the world, in Nepal. And of course, Nepal is where we have that third vehicle, the Vajrayana Buddhist tradition. There's a stupa here as well, near Varanasi. It's an important pilgrimage site. So that wraps it up for our time on a Buddhist tradition. This last lecture, we're talking about the Sangha, the third gem, and talking about the monastic communities, male monks, female monks, and then we concluded by briefly talking about various ways that lay people, non-monks, could participate in building karma. So through dana, the practice of the ritual of giving, through taking journeys to stupas, right? Taking pilgrimages to stupas to accrue credit, meditation, reading the scriptures, and following the teachings of Buddha across the board as much as possible. All right, so thank you so much. It's been good. Next time around, we'll pick up our next religious tradition, and that's what we have for the Buddhist tradition. All right, take care. Thank you so much. Bye.